We have to talk about an issue that is very important, especially for those that are very, very impressionable. We're talking about little kids in a world where, hey, you've got all of these Instagram influencers, and they've got selfies, and body image issues have been rising in recent years, and we got to talk about this for your kids. Joining us on 710 KURV is a healthy living expert, Jonathan Bailor, joining us on 710 KURV. So we're talking about small children, and I guess it's like it's the old story for a modern age. You have all of these really, really good looking people, and it affects kids in a lot of ways because they might not feel like they're good enough, or in some cases the parents might be pressuring them to look a certain way as they're growing up. But how much of this is healthy and how much of this is concerning?
100% of pressuring a child or any human being to look a certain way is unhealthy. Now, that doesn't mean health doesn't matter, and we should all eat Big Macs, and if you weigh 600 pounds, that doesn't pose any health risks. But the key thing here is to focus on the performance of the body, which we do have quite a bit of control over, rather than the appearance of the body, which in some cases we have no control over.
What are some common things that you see or experience, or stories that you've heard of parents crossing the line in this respect? Yeah, it's one thing for wanting your kids to be healthy and to be active and make good eating choices, but it's another thing to be like, well, maybe you're a little bit more than husky and we need to make some changes, or maybe they're just not, how do you say, maybe they're not, I guess, not gentle enough about it. Or how would you describe it? I'll ask that.
I think the biggest thing for us to watch out for as parents, I myself am the father of two daughters, is I think many of us know, or let's say are enlightened enough in this day and age to never call our children fat or husky. I mean, we probably know already that that's going to do more harm than good. Shame is not effective for anything. So the thing that I find to be most useful for most people is to really reflect on the way they treat themselves or speak about themselves in front of their children, because it's very easy for us to treat ourselves far more poorly than we would ever treat someone else. But our children see that and pick up on it and then start to model it. And that can be one of the most troubling hidden causes of body image issues.
Joining us on 710 KURV is Jonathan Bailor, who is a healthy living expert. We're talking about passing on poor body image issues onto the kids. Sometimes these things are, hey, I was the fat kid in school and I was made fun of, and I really don't want my kids to go through the same problems that I went through. And sometimes in that process, you actually become the bully in that situation. How do you avoid that?
The key thing with all of this, again, is a focus on performance. I want to tell any parent out there, it is noble and healthy to not want your child to be at a advantage. Every parent in the world wants their child to have every advantage in the world. So a child whose appearance causes them to be mercilessly mocked, and we do live in a culture where if you are significantly different from the norm, you will be mocked. The key is to focus on the rather than the, because if you have a body that performs well, you have a much higher likelihood of having a body whose appearance does not cause massive ridicule. And it matters. It does matter that we tell our children, if you want to play, if you want to make the varsity team, if you want to feel alert and not be falling asleep at your desk, if you want these physical outcomes that involve performance, eat this way, move your body this way, rather than if you want to look like that Instagram model or if you want to be thin, eat this way. It makes a tremendous difference.
This is true. The context and the perspective of all this goal setting. Yeah, you solidify a stronger, a more sensible goal having to do with your particular personal case, rather than, hey, if you want to look like, I don't know, I can't even think of the proper model in this case. I can't even. This is how out of touch I am with who's who. Like, what's her name? Olivia? No, that's not a good one. And if you want to look like this Instagram model over here, this is what you need to eat, and this is how you want to do it. But you're right. There's constructive ways of handling all of this. Now, when it comes to the old school, if you don't finish everything on your plate, you're not going to get dessert, or some of the classic habits that you see at the dinner table. How do you bring those into a modern world?
Finishing everything on your plate was a valid statement and for generations that, for example, through the Great Depression, where we're literally going to split up an egg today. Like, that's all the food we have for our family. We do not live in that world today. Any effort to force a child or any human being to eat when they are not hungry is not productive, and it causes a harmful relationship with food in which individuals learn not to listen to their body, or what would be called in scientific terms an internal locus of control, but instead to eat based on external cues, or what's called an external locus of control. And without getting too technical, focusing on anything external to motivate behaviors such as eating or self-image is very damaging. We want to be self-directed in those instances. So, of course, if your child wakes up at 3 a.m. and wants you to cook them a meal, that's a little bit problematic, and you are going to have dinner time, and it is reasonable to request that your child eats with your family and at least sits at the table. But if a child is not hungry, it is not helpful to force them to eat.
Our guest is Jonathan Bailor, who is a healthy living expert, our guest on 710 KURV. So what do you do in a situation where the child somehow just developed on their own, and they're not really receiving any pressure from the parents, but they're the ones that are coming up with, hey, I want to try this diet in particular. Say it's like a carnivore diet, or say it's like a intermittent fasting or keto or something like that, something that's unorthodox for someone, say, in their teens to be experimenting with. How do you handle that conversation?
The first thing I think is to celebrate that the child is taking an interest in what they put in their body. That's meaningful. So many of us, if we actually just thought about what we put into our bodies, we would not have the diabetes epidemic that we face today. Now, that said, if the child comes to you and says, I'm only going to eat cabbage, okay, it's great that they're thinking about what they're eating, but if they do what they say, it will probably harm themselves. The key thing here is to understand the why. Why do you want to eat this way? And to, of course, bring a little bit of common sense into the mix. So if the child wants to try a Mediterranean diet, or the carnivore diet, or the paleo diet, or a diet that could potentially provide the levels of nutrients necessary for any human, enabling them to try it and to monitor how it makes them feel, as a general rule of thumb, is going to work better than prohibiting something. In fact, if you want a quick way to get your child to do something, tell them they can't do it. I think any parent can empathize with that. So the key is helping the child to understand why do you only want to eat cabbage? Okay, well, let's try an experiment. Only eat cabbage for one day. And if the next day they feel like garbage, you're not going to shame them. You're not going to tell them, hey, I told you not to eat the cabbage, idiot. But instead say, interesting, what did you do yesterday that may have caused you to feel tired today? And you want them to essentially come to the conclusion on their own of what eating like that makes them feel, or how it makes them perform, rather than how it makes them look.
Would you get a nutritionist or a healthy living expert like yourself involved in a discussion like this?
If it becomes chronic and problematic, I think it could be very helpful. That said, kids can be very fickle, right? So it can jump from one thing to the next. So many of us don't really have that option. If you have that option, I think it could be a fantastic one if this turns into something chronic. But we always have to be sensitive as parents to not make bigger deals out of things than are needed. Kids, it's a phase they're going through. Yeah. I remember my mother told me that for 2 weeks when I was a child, I only spoke in rhyme. That was a phase. I didn't need to go see a specialist. I don't speak in rhyme anymore, at least not frequently. But again, The key thing is to monitor. If it becomes chronic, if it becomes damaging, then yes. But in the short term, just a little bit of understanding, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of conversation can go a long way.
Mr. Bailor, I want to thank you for your insight here today. That's Jonathan Bailor, healthy living expert. You can find more on Jonathan at SANESolution.com.